So we just hit 10K on YouTube, and there's the ability to do a community tab post having to do with a poll, and I polled you guys on what you wanted to see in today's video, and that was having to do with properly planting your plants. So let's get into it. But before I do, if you're new here, make sure you've hit that subscribe button and join the H2O army. I'm Justin from @H2O Plants on Instagram, and let's talk about planting plants. All right, so let's talk about plants. Now I'm going to use this small little nano tank to demonstrate what I'm going to be explaining here today. But basically, there's different forms of plants that you can have in your aquarium. You could have a rosette-like plant like this. This is a rosette sword, actually, is the name, and it is a rosette plant because all of its roots come out at the base of the plant. Then you have stem plants, and it could be many different forms of stem plants. This happens to be Monte Carlo, and as you can see, it has a central stem that the leaves come out of, and then the roots will actually come out of the stem itself. Next up, we have a type of runner plant or a rhizome plant. Now, this is dwarf hairgrass. Dwarf hairgrass has smaller little rhizomes than, say, like a nubus, but the rhizomes go underneath the soil, and the leaves come straight up from them. So that's how dwarf hairgrass is. Then you have regular taller stem plants, unlike Monte Carlo, that look similar like this. This is dwarf red parrot's feather, and you can see here it grows straight up versus the Monte Carlo, which grows horizontally. There's also the other type of rhizome plant, which is a nubus, and Java fern, which you can see here has a central mass that all the leaves come out of and the roots come out of. And these run typically horizontally. Sometimes they can run diagonally vertical depending on the plant growth, but that's how these grow. So now talking about planting plants. Typically a lot of people, they'll take a bunch of plants and they'll just jam them down in the substrate, but you really don't want to do that to optimize your plant growth. Let's just use rosette sword for instance. Now you can see here, if you were to just jam these down in here next to each other, they're going to be competing for each other, for space from each other, because they're too close together. Typically, when you're planting any sort of plant, not just aquatic plants, you want to give them ample room to grow out and have enough room for their leaf spread so they're not overcrowding each other. And that's what happens with a lot of people. I oftentimes get messages of what's happening to my plant. The bottom lower leaves are dying out, and that's typically because they have the plants overplanted and too bunched up together, and not enough light is getting to the base of the plant. And that's what starts killing off the bottom leaves and causing the stem to melt. It could also be compacting roots from, say, a very fine sand or whatnot, cutting off like nutrients and water flow and stuff, and that can provide the plant with improper planting material. But here is what a typically planting plant should look like. Now you can see here that the leaves just barely overlap, and there's enough space in between. Now, of course, you could fill this in with another one if you wanted to, say like this, or put other plants here to fill in that blank space. But when you have a large plant like a sword or a crypt, you want to give them room to spread out. Now, swords will actually produce runners from a central stalk in their rosette that will come up and out of the tank and produce new plants along that. But crypts, say, will produce runners off the sides of the plants and actually form a dense grouping of plants. So pretty much rule of thumb, just don't overcrowd swords or crypts or plants like that. They will eventually spread out. Their leaf span will get a lot bigger, and you won't risk losing a plant because another plant will shadow it. Now, of course, you could plant it very dense in the beginning, and then as the plants grow and fill out, you could thin it out a little bit and remove some plants, but that is up to you. But for optimal planting conditions, you definitely want to give each plant ample room. Now, this has to do with pretty much all plants. Now, let's just take a quick look at this hygro here. Now, this hygro has a tremendous span of its leaves. They will stretch roughly about 10 inches long from one leaf tip to the other. And so what you don't want to do is you don't want to overcrowd these, because they will shadow each other and cause die-off. So it's ideal that you plant these a little bit further away and allow their leaves to fill in the area naturally, both by trimming and replanting the tops, and also allowing side growth to form. The plant will kind of fill in on its own. Wherever there is light available, the plant will grow new leaves for. And we're going to just show you on this plant, but I will this will relate to Monte Carlo here in a second. But if you look at this little node right here, right, there's two little leaves that are coming off of here, or bigger leaves, I should say. And then there's these little buds here. And these little buds are side shoot blooms that are waiting to happen. So as soon as you were to trim this off here, two new side shoots will pop up, and this stem up here will grow roots out of where it's cut at, and also out of this next bud spot here. Now, why is that important? Well, because that's how you replant most stem plants, and Monte Carlo is a stem plant. So essentially what you could do is you could actually break this up into little nodes. Each leaf section could be a new plant, so you can actually break these up individually and sprinkle them throughout your tank, creating a more of a covered area and allow it to carpet out a bit quicker. And that's the beautiful thing about stem plants, is that's how they propagate out. Is the stem breaks, they sprout new roots, and then they put down new foliage because of the roots growing from their broken stems. So when it comes to planting a carpeting plant, if you want a good coverage, spread them out and break off. If it's a Monte Carlo or another stem plant that may be a carpeting plant, break off sections of the leaves, spread them out, and plant them individually versus planting in a giant mass and waiting for that to spread out. This will grow out much faster if you were to break it up and spread it around. Also, I have here is dwarf four-leaf clover, and this is another type of carpeting plant. However, this is more of a rhizome plant, and you can see here that all the leaves are coming off a center rhizome that's running horizontally. Now, what you could do is you could actually break this up in between each node where a leaf comes out of, basically, and replant, and that'll grow all new plants. So that's another way to propagate this plant and also plant it. If you were to have a bunch of this, you could essentially sit there and break up every single one. That's very time consuming, but it's possible, and it will produce quicker coverage of your carpeting plant. The same thing goes for dwarf hairgrass and other carpeting plants such as microsword that have a horizontal rhizome. You can easily break this clump up into different segments like this. Just basically rip it apart and replant. Just as long as there's a little root ball and a little foliage, this will grow, and you can plant this in pretty much everywhere over your tank, and it'll grow carpet quickly. In an ideal situation, you would not take a clump of stems and just plant them like this. This is overall just going to be bad for the plant, so try and avoid that at all costs if you can. Now, sometimes people get lazy, or they just don't have the room, or whatever the case is, but do know that sometimes the bottom of the plant will melt. This isn't always, but it is a lot of the time. So ideally, you would want to unbunch this, spread out the stems, and space them accordingly based on their leaf span. Now, this is a much finer leaf compared to the high grow that I showed you earlier, so this could be planted much closer together. But rule of thumb is leave a little bit of space in between each stem. Each plant, allow it to grow out naturally and fill in the area over time. I understand some people won't like gaps in their plants or in their tanks, but overall, allowing them to fill in naturally is going to make sure the plant doesn't die from overshadowing by other plants, and also allow it to have good root systems because it won't be competing with each other. And just to kind of add on, of course, every aquascape is ever evolving. Nothing is ever settled in stone. These are plants. You can move them around. However, with that said, a lot of people oftentimes move their plants around a lot. You do not want to do that. You want to allow the roots to penetrate the substrate and really get established before you start moving things around, as it's going to have to redo all the root growth once you move it from where it is currently. So just for instance with root growth, I just want to quickly demonstrate here. When you have your substrate and you have your plant like this, it's going to send a root down. Typically it'll send another root down and another root down, but what happens is all of these roots actually branch out like this. And anytime that you disrupt the plant, all these roots essentially have to reestablish and retake hold. So a lot of people often ask me also is, why isn't my plant growing as tall or as fast or whatnot? And it's because that all these roots have to reestablish themselves. So sometimes trimming the roots before you replant is ideal, so that way it could just grow new roots and it doesn't focus on re-establishing existing roots. But that can sometimes also harm the plant, so it's really up to you what you want to do. I've done both, but you want to keep in mind, once you plant the plant, kind of leave it be until you absolutely need to move it. That's going to be the best situation for them. Anyway, guys, if you enjoyed the video, make sure you hit that like button, share if it helped you and want to help others, subscribe here if you're new, and I'll see you on the next one.